Hi, I'm Linda of Windy Oaks, and I'm so glad you've joined me today. Today we're going to talk about what happens after you finish spinning your yarn. How do you go from a full bobbin of plied yarn to a skein ready to knit or weave from? If you're ready to take the next steps, this is the video for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks for being part of the flock. So you've finished your bobbin and you want to know what to do next. First thing we need to do is get it off of the bobbin. To do that, we're going to put it in a skein. Okay, technically what we call skeins are actually hanks, H-A-N-K-S, which is a very loosely tied and twisted bundle of yarn, but everyone calls them skeins, and that's what I'm going to do today. You have several options for taking the yarn off your bobbin. Some of them are free, some of them are pricey, and we'll go through them all. The first thing you're going to do is take your brake band off your bobbin so it spins freely. The first and cheapest is just a simple chair back. You can wind it around the chair into a skein. The upside to this is that it's completely free. We all have chairs sitting around here somewhere. The downside is that you don't always get a consistent size, and sometimes it can be slippery trying to keep it in the same place, especially like in this chair where we have a curve in the back. So it's wider at some places and narrower in others. The second most common way is to use a Niddy Notty. Niddy Notties are great because they can be very cost effective. I've seen people make them from PVC or even cardboard. This one's in Ashford. I think I paid $15 or $20 for it many years ago. And then I've seen them fancy and beautifully carved out of expensive woods that have cost hundreds of dollars. So you have a bit of a range of costs there. To use a Niddy Notty, so I just use my thumb to hold it in place. I put the bottom and the top at a 45-degree angle, and I go from the top to the bottom, to the top, to the bottom, and then to the top again. And then just wrap it and keep wrapping it until all of my yarn is off the bobbin. And once there's enough yarn to hold it together, I can just hold it in the center and wind that way. And it goes pretty quickly. You can make or get Niddy Notties in different sizes. You want something that will give you a skein that will fit on your yarn swift. That is the device that spins as you take yarn out of the skein and put it into a ball for knitting from or a cone for weaving. This Niddy Notty is about a yard and a little bit more. So my skeins will be just a little bit over a yard around. Most swifts can handle somewhere between 1.5 yards and 2 yards at the outside. So that's something to consider when you're looking at getting a Niddy Notty, is how long a skein your swift can handle. The third way to get yarn off a bobbin is to use a skein winder. Now, commercial skein winders can be extremely expensive. I really lucked out. I bought this swift. It's a type of yarn swift which is usually used for getting yarn from a skein into a ball, but I discovered almost by accident that I can also use it to wind a skein. So that's what I'm going to do today. The other nice thing about this particular skein winder / yarn swift, it was only about $40 or $50 on Etsy. So not a bank breaker. So I want to make sure that this is about 1.5 yards. Right now, this is actually closer to 2 yards at 72 inches. So I'm just going to take the pegs and pull them in a little, and they don't have to all be on the same hole. I have the pegs on this adjusted to just over 1.5 yards, which is where I want my skein length to be. Every time this swift goes around, we're going to get 1.5 yards loop. The important thing about knowing how long your skein is that it helps you count. Once you're done winding your skein, you can actually count the wraps and you can calculate approximately how much yardage you have. You don't want to wrap too tightly and you don't want it loosey-goosey so it doesn't get tangled. So just keep up a steady, even turning. And this is the same way you do it on a Niddy Notty, it's just wrapping a little bit differently. If you've ever wound a warp, this is not unlike winding a warp too for weaving. Right, you can see that we're getting started and looking pretty good. I'm going to come back when this is all wound into a skein. The skein has been wound. The next step is to put ties on our skein. And the reason we want to do that is if we just took it off the pegs now, it would just go everywhere willy-nilly. And it would get tangled and be miserable to work with. And we do not want to do that. I am very lucky in that my ends actually match up. So my first tie is just going to be the ends. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put my finger halfway between the skein. And I'm going to pull one of the ties through. Then I'm going to take the other tie and put it down through that tie. Go under the skein, come back so that it's looped around half the skein, and then I'm just going to tie it here in a knot. Now I am not tying this super duper tight. There is lots of wiggle room here. And you can see that that completely covers the whole skein. Now I'm going to do that again 3 more times. I'm going to do it straight across. Now although I used the yarn itself there, I'm using some cotton yarn that won't felt to the yarn when it gets washed, because that's our next step. We're going to take a field trip up to the bathroom and wash our skein. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put it through the middle of the skein. This time I'm going to take it around the bottom and back through so that it holds the bottom. And then I'm just going to tie it on top. Now, not only am I not tying it very tight here, if you are going to dye it, you want your ties to be really, really loose. You tie it too tightly, the yarn will be scrunched together and the dye won't be able to get inside of that. So you want a very loose tie on your skein. Do the other two. All right, same thing. I'm going to go through the middle, down under, pull the yarn through to the top. Now that my yarn is secure and isn't going to go everywhere, I'm just going to take these pegs out and then I have my skein. Voila! When you're ready to store your skein, you don't want it stored in a ball for any length of time. When you wind a ball, you put tension on the yarn, and tension will stretch it out, flatten out your twist, etc. So what you're going to do is I'm going to twist it, then I'm going to let it fold back on itself. I'm going to take one loop that my fingers are through and pull that loop through the other loop so that it keeps it from going every which way. And voila. And that is a skein right there that you can store for however long you need until you use it. When it's time to use it, you'll just pull the loop out and you have your yarn ready to use. All right, we've taken a field trip up here to the bathroom because we're going to use the sink to wash the yarn. We're washing the yarn for 2 reasons. One reason is to get out any oils or dirt that's still in the fiber or that may have gotten on the fiber during spinning from the oils from your hands. But the main reason that we're going to wash it is we're going to set the twist. And if you've ever braided your hair when it's wet, you know how it stays curly when it comes out of the braid and it's been dried. That's exactly what we're doing. We're going to let the fiber get wet and the twist will dry in place. It'll lock it in place. As a side note, if you're going to be dyeing your yarn, you can actually skip this step and put it right in the dye pot. The water from the dye pot will do the exact same thing as the sink that I'm about to do. You're going to use a drop or 2 of soap, and there are tons of options. You can use Blue Dawn. Make sure you are using the kind without enzymes because the enzymes will actually eat away at the fiber and make it weak. Dr. Bronner's, plain old hand soap, or one of my favorites, Unicorn Power Scour or Eucalan Wool Wash. You actually want to avoid Woolite because it has enzymes just like some of the Dawn and other dish soaps can have that will eat away at your wool. You're only going to need a drop or two. We're not really getting it soapy. We're just getting enough in there to break down any oils. I'm going to run the water. I'm going to make sure it is no more than room temperature. I don't want it hot. I don't like it cold because I find the oil doesn't break down when it's cold. But I also don't want it hot, and I'm not going to agitate anything because I don't want it to felt. I'm going to use the Eucalan today, and that's all I'm using. Just a teeny tiny bit. Okay, once the basin is full, I'm just going to take my yarn with the ties in, loosely tied, and I'm just going to set it in here. I'm being very careful not to agitate, and I'm going to press down just to get all of the yarn underwater. Just being very gentle, not putting a lot of pressure, no swishing. And then I'm going to step away for about a half an hour. And you can do half hour, 45 minutes, until after supper, whatever works for you. There's no time limit on it. You could probably even take it right out, but I like to let it sit, let any oils break down, any dirt precipitate out. So we'll be back when it's ready to come out of its bath. All right, our yarn has been soaking and is ready to come out of its bath. If it's a little bit hard to tell what's what, your ties will help you with that. Keep it in a nice loop. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is just press the water out very gently. Next, I'm going to take a towel. And I'm going to roll it in the towel and press out as much water as possible. And just lean on it like this, just to press it. Once you've pressed out as much water as you can, we are going to move on to the fun part. And that is called thwacking. Now I'm going to tell you up front, thwacking is very controversial among spinners. Some people never thwack, some people always thwack, some people thwack only when it's necessary for the type of yarn they're making, like some people do it only on a woolen yarn that they want fuzzy. Some people just snap, and this is a snap. And you can see that it helps. Already you can see it starting to move the twist to make it a little more even. And that's the point of it. So there was a great conversation in the Facebook group, A Spinner Study, and Deborah Scott had the most perfect explanation of why thwacking works. What happens when you wash your yarn is the fibers relax. And when you thwack it, you're going to snap it against a hard surface, which makes it contract suddenly. And then when it releases after the contraction, everything settles into place. Makes it a more firm, more even, and stronger yarn. All right, so I'm just gonna thwack this. And I'm going to keep my hand on one of the ties to keep track of where it is that I'm thwacking. And then I'm just going to move my hand to the other tie and thwack. Next one, and last one. Our yarn is all thwacked. Now I'm going to take a very unpopular stance here. One of the things people sometimes do instead of thwacking or snapping their yarn is when they hang it to dry, they put a weight on it. I do not advocate putting a weight on your yarn. And the reason I don't do that is if you remember the analogy about braided hair, the weighted yarn will dry straight, but the problem is as soon as it's put into a garment and that garment is washed so that it can be blocked, or other object if it's not a garment, but as soon as it's used and that item is washed for blocking, those fibers will twist again. They'll lose the straightness. If you let it dry naturally, it will set like that and it won't change its twist afterwards. So I do not recommend hanging a weight on it, but there are people who swear by it. So your mileage may vary and it's up to you. You can hang it outside and it'll dry pretty quickly, or you can hang it indoors. It takes a little bit longer. You can see one of the nice things is with our ties as loose as they are, the yarn can really spread out. If the ties are tight and the yarn is really cinched in, the bit in the middle isn't going to dry nearly as quickly. The other thing I like to do is I like to rotate the skein as it dries. If you notice how it's folded over my hand, after a while it'll get a little bit of a crimp there. So just every couple hours, no timer or anything, I just take it and I shift it so that a different part of the yarn is hanging. The other thing this does is it helps it dry more quickly because the water tends to collect at the bottom. So if you shift this, it lets the water sort of spread out and evaporate more quickly. Since our yarn is still drying upstairs, I'm going to take another skein that I'm actually getting ready to knit with because I'm almost done with the skein I'm currently using. And you can see I've got my ties on here. I'm going to start by just giving it a quick snap, just to sort of loosen up and wake up the fibers. Now I'm not snapping hard, just giving it a little tug. I'm gonna take it to my Swift here. And I know this is a little bit of a weird setup, but it works great for me. There you can see it fits nicely. This is called an umbrella Swift because of how it opens and closes a lot like an umbrella. I'm gonna start by taking off my ties. Before I use the ball winder, there are other ways that you can wind a ball that don't require any special equipment. The first is just wind a ball. You start winding it and wrapping it, and voila, you have a ball. The other way is called a nostepin. I'm not going to show you how to use a nostepin on this video, but if you want to know how, leave it in the comments and I'll make a video about it. Right, I'm just going to wind my yarn through the guide, secure it in the yarn holder, and then I'm going to start spinning. Now because of the way this is, I have to manually hold this at the right height. Otherwise it catches on my Swift. But this is wonderful because it creates a center pull ball, and that is easy to knit from. See, I'm not putting a lot of tension on it. I'm just keeping it nice and even. I'm not spinning super fast, so the ball is just winding evenly and smoothly. This particular ball winder is from the Fiber Art Supply Company. I'm not sponsored or anything, I just really love their stuff. I'll leave a link to the company in the description. And voila, a center pull ball. And I'm ready to knit or weave or do whatever I want to do with it. I really want to encourage you to actually use the yarn that you spin. It's a joy to knit or weave or crochet or felt with the yarn that you've made. And I just want to share a couple of the things that I've done with my Handspun. This is a teapot cozy that I made with my very first Handspun yarn. You can see that the yarn is not very even, but I loved it. I'm so happy with it. And I still use it all the time as a teapot cozy. I found some great little vintage buttons, and it brings me joy and reminds me how far I've come every time I use it. This scarf is one of my very favorites. I spun the yarn and I wove it myself on my rigid heddle loom. And then the last project that I want to show you is actually a cardigan I am working on. It's called the Yakushima cardigan, and I'm absolutely loving this knit. This is a Shetland alpaca blend, Shetland wool alpaca. The yarn that we caked up is yarn for this project. I'm almost out of this ball and ready to move on to the next. I hope you've learned a lot today. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. Thank you for being part of the flock, and I'll see you next time.